It's my great pleasure to introduce Steve Mantis. Steve is an injured worker and an advocate for injured workers and people with disabilities. He is currently the chair of the Research Action Committee at ONIWIG, which is the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Group. He organized injured workers locally in Thunder Bay through the Thunder Bay and District Injured Workers Support Group. He also organized injured workers regionally by co-founding ONIWIG and nationally by co-founding the Canadian Injured Workers Alliance. He was appointed to the board of directors of the WSIB from 1991 to 1994, and he currently serves on the board of the Occupational Health Clinics for Ontario Workers. Steve has won several awards in recognition for his advocacy work. He also has extensive experience with community engaged research, and he co-wrote a book titled Who Killed Sir William Meredith? A Workers' Comp Murder Mystery. The book is about engaging in research for justice based on his experience with a large project, which was the Research Action Alliance on the Consequences of Work Injury. This was a large project that was conducted between 2006 and 2011. Over the past couple of years, I had the great privilege of working with Steve on the issue of claim suppression and witness firsthand his dedication to making life better for injured workers, as well as the thoughtful and considerate ways in which he approaches his work. Please welcome Steve Mantis.
Awesome. So thanks so much for inviting me today, but even more, thanks for caring about injured workers. Oftentimes, we feel invisible. We feel after we've been hurt and we're no longer in the workplace that people don't see us anymore. People don't care about us. We're all kind of alone. And what's been happening, we've been hearing today and in your careers and in your lives, is you're starting to shine a light on us. And thank you for that. And that's, sorry to say, that's just a start. There's so much more to do. When I was asked to talk about workers' compensation, I thought, my gosh, I've been doing this for 45 years. I lost my left arm 1978. I'm lying in the hospital bed in Thunder Bay, Ontario. It's hurt construction. I thought, well, if I'm going to be involved in this compensation system, I got to find out what's going on. So I got a friend of mine to go down and get me a copy of the Workers' Compensation Act. So I read it cover to cover, lying in my hospital bed. And I've been studying the compensation system ever since. I'm not a researcher, I'm not an academic, just a guy who got hurt and is trying to figure out what's going on. And I studied history when I was in school, so I'm kind of a history buff. I like to try to understand how things are happening. And what I've seen just in that 45 years is a real transition in how the system works or doesn't work. And trying to figure out why that's happening and what we can do about it. It's kind of the big picture. What's the big picture? What's going on? And, Stephanie talked about my focus has been and will continue to be how do we improve the lives of workers who have been injured or made ill on the job? Who says that anymore? Does the compensation system say that? Who says that? Like, if we forget what this is all about, we end up looking in this silo over here in this box and this puzzle, and we kind of forget about what's this all about. And in my 25 or 30 years working with academics, I've come to understand that there's a shortcoming in the system of research. Because you can't ask that question. There's too many variables. Like, you can't do a research project about what the hell's going on with workers' compensation. Everybody will laugh at you. But that's really the question. All you can do is focus in on a certain area and try to understand a little bit about what's in that little area. But how do they fit together? We're talking about the policy and practice and return to work. And okay, we're looking at people's experiences, and I've been hearing all day long, there's some pretty bad experiences. But why is that happening, and what are we going to do about it? And how do we know what to do about it? So these are questions in a way that really speak to collaboration. None of us are going to answer that alone. It's through understanding, listening to each other, hearing each other with an open mind. That's really hard for me because I'm an opinionated bugger, and I got my strong opinions. But I know that if I don't open it up and listen to others, I'm going to miss stuff. Because even though I think I'm right most of the time, I still don't understand the experiences of everybody. And that's what it's about. It's about all of us. And I think about the changes that are happening in workers' compensation, and I parallel them to the changes that are happening in our greater society and our workplace and our economies. When I served on the board of the workers' compensation, 1991, January, I got my mind blown. We just looked at financial statements, and all the financial statements, they didn't include it, but there were 6 zeros on the end of every item, which means we were dealing with the smallest number was $1 million. It was all in millions, and it just kind of goes, I can't even conceptualize that. But after a little while, you kind of catch on. And what we saw was that 80% of the workforce that was covered by workers' compensation was employed by 20% of the companies. That's totally reversed. Now they say 80% of the workforce is small business rather than these big corporations. But what does that look like? What does that mean? Well, that means contracting out. That means temporary work agencies. That means self-employment. Be entrepreneurs. Don't expect anything from us, the big corporations that are making more money every year and more money every year. But we don't want to be responsible for those damn workers. We have to get rid of our liabilities. So that change was in a way driven by the system moving from one of a collective liability, which was the foundation of the system, started in 1915 with the advice of Sir William Meredith. That collective liability meant that the behavior that's being directed is we're all in this together. We share a responsibility, and as employers, you're put into a group with other employers. If you're a good employer, and the guy down the road's a bad employer, his bad business is making my rates higher. I now have a motivation to go and try to influence that he does a better job protecting his workers, like I do. Well, then we brought in this financial model that said, we need to rate everybody by actually how they're doing, their experience rating. And that was introduced in Ontario around the 1985, piloted in Thunder Bay, where I was from, in the forest industry. And we saw the changes in behavior right away. But those have built and built and built so that it's not a collective liability anymore. Let's focus more on the individual liability of the employer. And that will make those other employers do a better job, right? Well, no. What it does is the easiest way for me to reduce my liability is say, that accident didn't happen here. That must have happened when they were playing hockey. There's a box on the form that when you send in to the workers' compensation, do you think this accident might have happened somewhere else? You just check that box. You just saved yourself thousands of dollars. The system encouraged claims management. Rather than health and safety, it's manage my costs. Now this is about money. It's not about people anymore. It's now about money. So I'm a businessman. I'm going to be able to manage my money and manage my liability. And that behavior has continued and continued, and we've heard in a number of presentations some of the ramifications. And the system itself has driven that. So not only am I an advocate, I was an employer for 10 years, I worked in vocational rehabilitation for another 8 years, worked with research for a bunch of years. When you're an employer and you have an injury, you get a monthly statement from workers' compensation saying, you know how much we paid your guys? I look at it and I'm kind of going, oh my God, they're sending me a bill for thousands of dollars. And then you go, oh, and then you get all upset. Well, no, it's not a bill. It's just a report. But I'm still upset because that guy that I thought was helping me out is now costing me money. So they're encouraging this dislocation between the worker and management. Joan Eakin and Ellen was involved in this project, talked about the discourse of abuse, how the system creates this conflict between the worker who's injured or ill and the employer. And so you have to kind of go back and say, wait a second, what's this system about? Is it about helping people recover from injury and illness? Then why are we creating conflict between the only place we know that's going to give you secure money going forward is if you go back to work? How do we balance these things? Where is our ability to talk about this discourse that creates this image that workers are now the liability, that we're the risk, that we're costing you money, that we're a bunch of bums, that maybe we're even criminals because we're taking advantage of the system? And the continued looking at that discourse has led to all kinds of ramifications. One is claim suppression. Stephanie mentioned we've been working for 2 years on this. Well, it's really funny. When I was on the board of directors, we had introduced experience rating into the program, and then we had a consultant do an evaluation after 5 years. The consultant came back and said a third of the employers we talked to were not reporting injuries because of experience rating. By law, they have to report injuries. I said, we can't go forward on this program. Well, you know, I was the lone wolf there, and of course, it moved forward. So here's decisions being made to encourage employers to do things that's against the law. But it's okay, because this financial view of the world that it's all about money became predominant. And workers and us are losing out. And you link it to the other things that are happening. Our university campuses, how are they treating their staff anymore? Here's the center of higher learning, and we're trying to find ways to exploit our workers as much as we can. No, wait a second. This is happening not only in workers' compensation, but you look at the outsourcing, the temporary work. We're finding more migrant workers. How can we pay people as little as possible and get the work done and not be responsible for what happens to them? That's not the direction I think we want to go in. And I think we would have probably 90% agreement in this room. So how do we now take this message more broadly? What can we do? Because we're having these insights, and I'm hearing it in every presentation I've heard today. How do we move beyond this 150 people now? How do we engage with our larger society, with our colleagues, whether it's in universities or in community or workplaces? How do we engage with our politicians, our bureaucracies? What are those processes? And I think what we've seen in our experience is when we work together, when we find that common purpose, we can actually make headway. And as, our groups, we talk about the Ontario Network of Injured Workers groups, we're all volunteers. We have no money. Our little group in Thunder Bay, we're all volunteers. We've been plugging away for 40 years. And I'm kind of a math guy, so I try to keep track of what the benefits have been of advocacy from our volunteer community. And when you see some of the results, it's like hundreds of millions of dollars a year. We had one little campaign back in the 90s focusing on workers who have a permanent impairment and end up unemployed. This is really the highest risk group. If you're not back to work, what are you going to get? So let's focus to make sure those people don't fall into poverty. So we were able to focus on that issue, and people were able to get another, in today's dollars, like $540 a month. These are people that were unemployed. We got 20,000 workers more that extra monthly supplement. Well, June 1st is Injured Workers Day. Our local president talked about, I'm just turning 65, so I'm losing that supplement. So I did the quick figures in my head. Well, actually, I know, I did it on a piece of paper. So he is now losing $6,000 a year, but that was $6,000 he was getting as a result of our advocacy. For the last 30 years, $180,000 went into his pocket because of advocacy. And then you do the math with 20,000 workers, and we're up to over $2 billion into the pockets of the people that need it most. And we can continue to do that if we can identify, this is supposed to keep people out of poverty. How do we do that? How do we work the system? Because we're not going to change the whole damn world, though I want us to. How can we focus in to say those that are at highest risk, we're not going to let them fall through the cracks? Identify those areas, focus in on them, work together to get the research, the documentation, the lived experience, the personal stories, and don't let go. And keep on driving that issue until you make actual headway. And like I say, I've got, at home, I got like 6 pages of things we've won. While the system has been deteriorating and being cut back, we have still won significant gains. So it's possible to do, and it's something that we really need to do in partnership. And I think one issue I have been focusing on for 35 years is tracking the long-term outcomes of workers with injuries and illnesses. If we don't know what happens to these workers, well, I guess we don't have to worry about it. They just fell through the cracks somewhere. I don't know where they are. So we don't have the data oftentimes to show that first return to work that now is successful because we got new policies and new practices only lasted 6 months. Or maybe it lasted a year and a half or 2 years. But the research, the little bit we have, shows that it's not sustainable for about 50% of the people. Workers' Compensation Ontario says 92% are back to work, no problem, within 6 months. But we're not going to check and see what happens a year later. Well, there was, after a bunch of our advocacy, the Institute for Work and Health has done a little study, and they reported on just 18 months after injury. There was a 30% unemployment rate if you had a serious injury. And that's only 18 months. We know the longer that time goes on, the rate of unemployment goes up and up and up. But now, we're kind of bugging them to say, okay, you did a 3-year follow-up, but would you write it up? Well, there's economic pressures there. How critical are they going to be of their funders, who is the government of Ontario and the Workers' Compensation Board? So there's a certain level of independence we need to be able to say, here's the information. This is what's really happening. And we can actually provide an alternative that's going to be healthier for the workers. In the long term, it's healthier for our whole economy. And it's going to be cheaper, I think, to kind of take those positive steps going forward rather than trying to pick up the pieces at the end. So I should probably wrap it up there. And oh my gosh, right on 20 minutes, 70. So I think I have a couple of minutes for questions or comments. And thank you very much.
Hi, Steve. My name is Holly, and I'm actually with Dexterra and Horizon North. Hi to everyone here. I thought of asking you this question because you said you were with WSIB for a couple of years, and the reason for this question is I think there might have been a previous session in which you covered the financial impact and what it actually does to disability management coming from workplace injuries. So I'm wondering if the board ever considered, because it sounds to me that you were not for experience cost. And it sounds to me that an external consultant came in and said, listen, this is what's actually happening. So I'm wondering at this point if it was ever considered to establish experience costs or the experience years based on the kind of injury. So rather than actually setting experience cost at, let's say, in some provinces at 3 years and some others are at 6 years, I'm wondering if the kind of injury could set the experience year. So let's say for strain injuries, if that could be set at, let's say, a year, and let's say the cost drops off after that, because I do think that there is an impact on how we actually manage injured workers coming from that. And let's say for psychological injuries, because we don't want those injuries to to fall through the cracks, maybe we set experience cost of those years to 3 years or more. Just wondering if that's been considered before.
You know, I don't know the answer to that in terms of whether it was considered or not. But once again, it's like, what do we want to achieve? Do we want to achieve cheaper insurance? Or do we want to achieve better health outcomes? So workers' compensation can tell you every dollar they spend where it went. They keep track of that perfect. But they don't keep track of what happens to workers after they get injured, particularly those with a permanent impairment who are going to have a lifelong disability. So we focus on what we track. So if we just want to track money, that's going to now color all of the subsequent decisions along the path. So we want to focus on collecting the information about, are we helping people recover and live healthy and productive lives? I think that's what we want to focus on. So if we collect that information, then we'll be able to make decisions based on real life experiences rather than on dollars. So that's, and we look at the experience of our healthcare system. In Ontario, it's called the Ontario Health Insurance Program or something like that. It's collective liability. Your employer doesn't tell you, don't go see the doctor, it's going to cost too much money. Doesn't say you shouldn't go for surgery. They don't even participate in that because they don't have a financial return by playing the system. The work we're doing with Stephanie on claim suppression, we've been meeting with one of the senior managers at the WSIB, whose job is compliance, to make sure employers and workers are following the law. They do these new workplace audits to see. They have a whole matrix and what companies do they think maybe you're kind of not in compliance. And when we met with her last week, she said, seems like once the employer starts playing with trying to make money or lessen how much they pay on workers' compensation, they go from one step to another step to another step. And they just go down that path of there's all these different ways of saving money or turning workers' comp into a profit center. So once again, it's like, what are you focused on? If you're focused on the dollars, that's the path that it takes you on.
Thank you, Steve. And you did a great job, like telling us how this compensation board are creating lots of loophole, lots of crack the injured worker fall through. I have a question. I would like to know that how many injured worker case get denied when we see that $55 million only used to pay the benefit and $1.5 billion return to the employer. So how many cases get denied, and is this case denied in any of this valid reason? But who are checking these things? Like in the systems, who are taking like all this rejected case of the injured worker? Like who are taking the accountability to check it, that is the rejection is a valid or non-valid? Like is there any kind of inspection or anyone watch these things? Because we see in our community a lot of claim gets suppressed. And this suppression happen, but we feel it like the insurance board need another board that should investigate why this suppression is happen. Is there any kind of investigation happen? Or is there any data shows WSIB how many cases they get denied? How many people fall through by the crack? Because we know that one injury for one person, it's not inside in the person. It's in the family, it's in the society. So we carry on this burden. That burden is from the employer. We carry this burden as a public funded. So why there is no another body to confronting this kind of suppression?
You know, there's all these complexities, so I don't feel like I'm going to answer effectively. But you know, you look at the dialogue from our provincial government in Ontario. The CEO at the WSIB, president, sends a letter to all employers last year saying, You know how good we've been? We've reduced the amount you pay by $4 billion in the last 3 years. Didn't say a word about how well we're doing for workers. The Minister of Finance and other government ministers, when they talk about workers' compensation, they talk about how much money they're saving employers. That is guiding what happens to us. It's now okay for business to treat you like shit. It's okay, because we can give them more money back. You know, it makes me so sad, because we're losing. Well, it come back to the beginning, that we're invisible. They just kind of erase us from the whole equation, that they don't matter anymore. They're no longer productive. They're now a liability. Let's sweep them under the rug. And it's only things like what I see the South Asian Women's Rights Organization, now renamed, are standing up and say, no, that's not fair. I have such respect for you guys, sorry, that, you know, it is oftentimes the most vulnerable groups in our society who are at highest risk and who are also the greatest leaders in social change, that point out so clearly how the system's not working well and saying this isn't right and standing up, because in a way you have nothing more to lose. And that's the bad side of it. But that means that there's hope for the future. There's hope for our kids and our grandkids, that we can make it better for them, because they're going to be coming up to these same issues as we've been facing. And if we don't take action now, you know, I'm just scared. I got 14 grandkids, and I'm going to go, which one's next? You know. So thank you so much for standing up for your rights and for each other together.